When Widow Evelyn Crow knocked on the door of Blackwood Ranch, she was prepared to beg for work, food, anything to survive another frozen Nebraska night. What she wasn't prepared for was the ranch owner's shocking response to her plea, "The only position I have is wife." No courtship, no kindness, just a brutal transaction offered by a man as broken as the land around him. With starvation at her back and a stranger's cold proposal before her, Evelyn faced an impossible choice that would transform 3 shattered lives forever. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far this story travels. And if you want to know whether Evelyn accepts this shocking proposal and what happens when desperation becomes the foundation of something unexpected, stay with me until the very end. You won't believe where this journey leads. The wind cut across the Nebraska prairie like a blade made of ice, slicing through Evelyn Crow's threadbare coat as though the fabric were nothing more than paper. She stumbled forward, her boots, more whole than leather now, crunching through the frozen crust of snow that stretched endlessly in every direction. The horizon was a blur of white and gray, earth and sky bleeding together until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. She had been walking for 2 days. Or was it 3? Time had lost meaning somewhere between burying her husband in a pauper's grave outside Omaha and being turned away from the 5th boarding house that wouldn't take a woman with no money and no references. The world had made its position clear. Evelyn Crow was alone, unwanted, and rapidly running out of options that didn't end with her frozen body discovered in a ditch come spring. Her hands had gone numb hours ago. She could no longer feel her fingers inside the thin gloves, could no longer feel her toes inside the boots that had belonged to Thomas before the fever took him. Everything Thomas had owned now belonged to his creditors, everything except these boots, which had been on his feet when he died, and which no one had bothered to claim from a dead man too poor to matter. Evelyn had taken them anyway. Widow's privilege, she'd thought bitterly, pulling them off her husband's still warm feet while the undertaker looked away in pity or disgust. She hadn't cared which. She cared now, though. She cared very much about staying alive long enough to regret every choice that had brought her to this frozen hell. The ranch house appeared like a mirage through the blowing snow, a dark shape against the white, substantial, and real. Smoke rose from the chimney, a thin gray line that meant warmth, shelter, life. Evelyn's heart lurched in her chest, hope and fear tangling together until she couldn't separate one from the other. She had passed 2 other homesteads in her wandering. Both had turned her away without opening their doors more than a crack. "We don't need help," they'd said. "Can't afford another mouth," they'd said. "Try the next place," they'd said, as though there would always be a next place, as though the prairie went on forever with unlimited chances for a desperate woman to find mercy. This was her last chance. Evelyn knew it in her bones, in the trembling weakness of her legs, in the hollow ache of her stomach that had gone beyond hunger into something darker and more dangerous. If this door closed in her face, she wouldn't make it to another. The house was larger than she'd expected, 2 stories built of solid timber that spoke of prosperity, or at least of past prosperity. The barn beside it sagged slightly, its roof patched in places, but the main house stood firm. Smoke continued to rise from the chimney, steady and sure. Someone lived here. Someone who could afford to heat their home, who had timber to burn and walls to keep out the killing cold. Evelyn climbed the porch steps, her legs shaking so badly she had to grip the railing to stay upright. The wood was solid beneath her hand, real and unforgiving. She stood before the door for a long moment, gathering what remained of her courage, trying to smooth her wild hair back from her face with fingers that wouldn't cooperate. She looked like a madwoman, she knew. A scarecrow. A ghost. She knocked anyway. The sound seemed too loud, too desperate, echoing across the frozen prairie like a gunshot. Evelyn waited, her breath coming in shallow gasps that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with the terror of what would happen if no one answered, if this door remained closed, if this last chance slipped away like all the others. Footsteps sounded inside, heavy, deliberate, male. The door opened. The man who stood before her was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn work clothes that had seen better days but were clean and well-maintained. His face was weathered, carved by wind and sun into hard planes and sharp angles. Dark hair shot through with gray. dark eyes that assessed her with the same cold calculation a man might use to evaluate a horse at auction, checking for soundness, for value, for whether the asking price matched the probable return. He said nothing, just looked at her, waiting. Evelyn tried to speak and found her throat had closed. She swallowed, forced the words out past the tightness, past the shame of what she was about to do. "Please," she said. "I need work." The man's expression didn't change. "No work." The door started to close. "Please." Evelyn put her hand against the wood, stopping it, her voice breaking on the word. "I can cook, clean, mend, anything. I don't need wages, just food and a place to sleep. A corner somewhere. I won't be trouble, I promise. I said no work." His voice was flat, empty of inflection. Not cruel exactly, but completely devoid of sympathy. "Then let me sleep in your barn," Evelyn begged, hating herself for it, hating the desperate crack in her voice, the tears that burned hot in her eyes despite the cold. "Just one night, just until the storm passes. Please, I'll be gone by morning. You'll never even know I was there." "The barn's not fit for sleeping." He studied her more carefully now, his gaze moving over her face, her threadbare coat, the boots that were obviously too large, the hollow desperation in her eyes. "When did you last eat?" The question caught her off guard. Yesterday. The day before. I don't—" She trailed off, realizing she genuinely didn't know. Something shifted in the man's face, though she couldn't read what it was. He stepped back from the door, opening it wider. "Come inside." Evelyn didn't move. Couldn't move. The sudden reversal felt like a trap, felt dangerous in a way she couldn't articulate but understood in her bones. Men didn't invite strange women into their homes without reason, and those reasons were rarely generous. "I'm not—" She straightened her spine, tried to summon some scrap of dignity. "I'm not offering that." For the first time, something like emotion crossed the man's face, a flicker of what might have been dark amusement or might have been contempt. "I'm not asking for it. You want to freeze on my porch, that's your choice. But if you want to live through the night, get inside." He turned and walked away, leaving the door open behind him. Evelyn stood frozen. By fear or cold or the surreal quality of the moment, she couldn't say. Then her body made the decision her mind couldn't, stumbling forward over the threshold into warmth that felt like being stabbed with 1,000 hot needles. The door closed behind her with a solid thunk. The interior of the house was dim, lit only by the fire burning in the large stone fireplace and a single oil lamp on the mantel. The main room was spacious but sparsely furnished, a scarred wooden table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair near the fire, shelves lined with basic supplies. Everything was clean but worn, functional without being comfortable. The house of a man who lived here but didn't care much about the living. "Sit." The man gestured to one of the chairs at the table. Evelyn sat, her legs giving out more than obeying the command. She watched as he moved to the stove, stoking the fire inside, setting a pot of something to warm. His movements were efficient, practiced, the actions of a man who'd been cooking for himself for a long time. "Name's Lucas Blackwood," he said without turning around. "This is Blackwood Ranch. What's yours?" "Evelyn Crow." Her voice sounded strange in the quiet room, thin and reedy. I was married. My husband died 3 weeks ago. Fever." "You got people?" "No." The word came out flat. "No people. No money. No anything." Lucas said nothing to that, just continued working at the stove. After a moment, he ladled something into a bowl, stew from the smell of it, and set it in front of her along with a hunk of bread that looked like it had been baked days ago but was still edible. "Eat slow," he said. "You eat too fast after starving, you'll just sick it back up." Evelyn stared at the food, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold the spoon. The first bite was heaven and agony combined, her stomach cramping immediately, her body not sure whether to accept the nourishment or reject it. She forced herself to eat slowly, taking small bites, letting each one settle before taking the next. Lucas watched her from across the table, his expression unreadable. "How long you been walking?" he asked finally. 2 days? Maybe 3? Evelyn took another careful bite. I was in Omaha. Tried to find work there, but she trailed off. There was no point explaining how quickly a widow with no skills and no references became invisible, became less than nothing. You walked from Omaha. It wasn't a question, but there was something in his voice now, not quite disbelief, not quite respect. That's 40 miles. I didn't have anywhere else to go. Lucas leaned back in his chair, studying her with those dark, unreadable eyes. You said you need work. Yes. Evelyn set down her spoon, meeting his gaze directly, despite the fear curling in her stomach. Anything. I meant what I said. I can cook, clean, mend. I'm strong, or I was before. I learn quick. I won't cause trouble. I don't need a cook. Lucas's voice was matter-of-fact. Don't need a cleaner or a mender either. House is fine as it is. The hope that had kindled in Evelyn's chest died as quickly as it had sparked. Oh, I need a wife. The words hung in the air between them like something physical, something she could reach out and touch if she dared. Evelyn stared at him, certain she'd misheard, certain the cold had damaged her hearing or her mind or both. I'm sorry, she said slowly. What did you say? I need a wife. Lucas repeated the words with the same inflection he might use to say he needed a new plow or a better milk cow. That's the only position I have available. Evelyn's mind went blank, then began racing. This was it then. The trap she'd sensed, the danger she'd known was waiting. Men didn't help women for free. There was always a price, always something they wanted in return. And this man wanted, I have a son, Lucas continued as though he were discussing terms for hiring ranch hands. Ethan. He's 4 years old. His mother died 6 months ago, influenza. Since then, he doesn't talk, hasn't said a word to anyone. Evelyn's racing thoughts stumbled, caught off guard by this information. I'm sorry for your loss. Lucas ignored the condolence. I can't run this ranch alone and take care of a boy who won't speak, won't eat properly, won't sleep through the night. I need someone to care for the house and the child. In exchange, you get a roof, food, your name on the deed as my legal wife. You'd have rights here. Protection. Protection. Evelyn heard herself echo the word, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. From the elements. From the kind of men who see a woman alone and think she's fair game. From starving to death walking across the prairie. Lucas's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Not warmth exactly, but maybe the ghost of understanding. I'm not offering romance, Mrs. Crow. I'm offering survival. For both of us. You don't even know me. I know you walked 40 miles in winter with no food and boots that don't fit. I know you knocked on my door instead of lying down to die. That tells me what I need to know. Evelyn looked down at her hands, at the wedding ring she still wore, even though Thomas had been dead for weeks, and the marriage had been more burden than blessing, even before the end. And what would you expect from me? As a wife? I told you what I expect. Care for the house. Care for Ethan. That's all. That's all. She looked up at him, searching his face for deception, for the lie that had to be hiding somewhere in this impossible offer. You want a wife in name only. I want a mother for my son, and someone to keep this house from falling apart around us. Lucas stood, moving to pour himself coffee from the pot on the stove. What I don't want is complications. My wife died 6 months ago. I'm not looking to replace her in my bed. I'm looking to keep my boy alive and my ranch running. If that's something you can do, we can help each other. If it's not, I'll give you food for the road and you can leave in the morning. Evelyn sat in silence, her mind spinning. The offer was insane. Marriage to a complete stranger, caring for a traumatized child, living on an isolated ranch with a man who looked at her with all the warmth of a winter stone. Every sensible instinct she possessed screamed at her to refuse, to thank him for the food and leave at first light, to take her chances anywhere but here. But where would she go? Back to Omaha, where she'd already been turned away from every door. Further west, into territory even more wild and unforgiving. She had no money, no prospects, no skills that anyone valued enough to pay for. The truth was brutal and inescapable. She would be dead within a week if she left this house. I need to think about it, she said finally. Lucas nodded as though he'd expected this. You can sleep upstairs tonight, second door on the right. There's a bed and clean linens. Tomorrow morning, you give me your answer. And if I say no, then I give you supplies and you go your way." He met her eyes directly. "I won't hold you here against your will, Mrs. Crow. That's not the kind of arrangement I'm proposing." Evelyn wanted to ask what kind of arrangement he was proposing, wanted to understand what species of man made such an offer with such complete lack of emotion, but exhaustion was crashing over her in waves now that food sat in her stomach and warmth surrounded her. Her eyes felt heavy, her thoughts sluggish. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow." Lucas gestured toward the stairs. "Second door, there's water in the pitcher if you need to wash." Evelyn stood on legs that shook with fatigue, made her way toward the stairs. She paused at the bottom, looking back at the man who had just proposed marriage with all the romance of a business transaction. "Mr. Blackwood?" "Yes?" "Why me? You could advertise for a wife. Someone younger, someone with references, someone who isn't half dead from walking across the prairie." Lucas was silent for a long moment, his face shadowed by the firelight. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "Because you knocked on my door," he said. "Because you're desperate enough not to ask questions you don't want answers to. Because you need this as much as I do, which means you won't leave when things get hard." He paused. "And because my son needs someone who understands what it means to lose everything." Evelyn had no response to that. She climbed the stairs in silence. The room he had directed her to was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in faded quilts and a washstand in the corner. A single window looked out over the frozen prairie, darkness pressing against the glass. Evelyn stood at the window for a long moment, looking out at nothing, seeing everything, her past, her present, her impossible future. She could hear movement downstairs, Lucas banking the fire, moving around the main room with the heavy tread of a large man trying to be quiet. She wondered where he slept, wondered where the boy was, wondered what kind of woman agreed to marry a stranger for nothing more than the promise of survival. A desperate one, she thought, a woman with no other choices. Evelyn turned away from the window and sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. The room was warm, the bed soft beneath her, the house solid around her. Everything she'd been without for weeks, warmth, shelter, safety, was here, offered freely. All she had to do was say yes to a loveless marriage to a man she didn't know, to become mother to a child she'd never met, to tie her life to this isolated ranch in the middle of nowhere. All she had to do was give up any hope of something more. But what more had there ever been? Her marriage to Thomas had been arranged by families looking to combine resources. There had been no love there either, just duty and disappointment, and eventually, death. At least Lucas Blackwood was honest about what he wanted. At least this arrangement came with clear terms instead of false promises. Sleep came slowly, exhaustion warring with anxiety, her body grateful for the warm bed even as her mind churned with impossible questions. Sometime deep in the night, she heard footsteps in the hall, soft, hesitant, different from Lucas's heavy tread. A child's footsteps. They paused outside her door. Evelyn held her breath, listening. Whoever stood there, Ethan, it must be Ethan, didn't knock, didn't call out, just stood there in the darkness on the other side of the door, waiting for something, testing something. After a long moment, the footsteps retreated. Evelyn lay awake until dawn, watching the darkness give way to gray light, listening to the house settle and creak around her. When morning finally came, pale and cold through the window, she rose and washed her face in the icy water from the pitcher, smoothed her hair as best she could, and went downstairs to give Lucas Blackwood her answer. He was already awake, standing at the stove making coffee. He looked up when she entered, his expression neutral, waiting. "I have conditions," Evelyn said. Something shifted in Lucas's face, not quite relief, not quite satisfaction, but acknowledgement that she'd made her choice, and it was the one he'd been hoping for. "I'm listening." "I want respect," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "I'm not a servant. If I'm to be your wife, I want to be treated as a partner, not hired help." "Agreed." "I want shared authority over the household and the boy. You don't undermine me, I don't undermine you. We make decisions together." "Agreed." "I want honesty about the ranch's finances." If I'm putting my name on that deed, I have a right to know what I'm signing on to. Agreed. Evelyn paused, surprised by how quickly he was accepting her terms, searching for the catch that had to be hiding somewhere. I want time. I won't share a bed with you. Not now, maybe not ever. That's not part of this arrangement. I already told you what I expect, Lucas said quietly. That hasn't changed. And what about Ethan? What if he doesn't accept me? What if I can't help him? Then we deal with it together. Lucas set down his coffee cup. Anything else? Evelyn thought of the boy in the hallway, standing outside her door in the darkness, and felt something tighten in her chest. I want you to give him time too. Don't force him to call me mother. Don't force him to accept me. Let him come to it on his own terms, if he comes to it at all. Fair enough? Lucas extended his hand across the table. Do we have an agreement, Mrs. Crow? Evelyn looked at his hand, calloused, scarred by years of hard work, offering her something that felt both like salvation and surrender. She thought of the frozen prairie, the closed doors, the empty road stretching endlessly toward a future that held nothing but slow starvation or quick death. She thought of the boy in the hallway, silent and grieving. She thought of this house, solid and real, offering shelter from the killing cold. She reached out and took Lucas Blackwood's hand. We have an agreement, she said, but I have one more condition. Lucas raised an eyebrow, waiting. I sleep in my own room until I say otherwise. You gave up your bedroom last night. I assume that's where you sleep? It is. Then tonight, I'll move into it, and you can take the guest room. The boy's room is next to the master bedroom, Lucas said slowly. If he wakes in the night, then I'll be closer to him than you would be. Evelyn met his eyes steadily. If I'm to be his mother, Mr. Blackwood, I should be the one he can reach in the dark. For the first time, something like respect flickered across Lucas's face. All right, he said. Your room, then. They stood there in the morning light, hands still joined, both understanding that they'd just made a bargain that would change everything. Not a romantic proposal, not a love match, just two desperate people choosing survival and calling it marriage. When? Evelyn asked. The circuit preacher comes through every 6 weeks. He's due in 3 days. Lucas released her hand. Until then, you're a guest in this house. After he performs the ceremony, you're family. Those terms acceptable? Yes. Good. Lucas turned back to the stove. You should meet Ethan before breakfast. He's usually in his room until I call him down. Evelyn's heart lurched. What should I say to him? The truth. Lucas poured coffee into a second cup and handed it to her. That you're staying. That you're going to help take care of him. That you're not trying to replace his mother. Will he understand? If he doesn't speak, he understands everything. He just doesn't answer. The pain in Lucas's voice was brief but unmistakable. His mother used to sing to him in the mornings. Since she died, the mornings are hardest. Evelyn wrapped her hands around the warm cup, drawing courage from the heat. I can't sing. Then don't sing. Just be there. Lucas met her eyes. That's all he needs. Someone who doesn't leave. The words hit harder than Evelyn expected, carrying weight she didn't fully understand. She nodded, set down her cup, and climbed the stairs toward the boy's room, each step feeling like crossing a threshold she couldn't uncross. She knocked softly on the door Lucas had indicated. No answer. Ethan? She called gently. My name is Evelyn. May I come in? Silence. Evelyn opened the door slowly, giving the child time to protest if he wanted to. The room was small and neat, with a child-sized bed against one wall and a shelf of wooden toys and books. A 4-year-old boy sat on the bed, knees drawn up to his chest, watching her with dark eyes that looked too old for his young face. He looked like his father, same dark hair, same serious expression, but there was something gentle in his features that must have come from his mother. He wore clean clothes, his hair had been recently brushed, and everything about him spoke of a father who was trying desperately to take care of a child he didn't know how to reach. Hello, Ethan, Evelyn said quietly, staying in the doorway. Your father probably told you I'd be here. I'm Evelyn. The boy said nothing, just watched her with those grave, assessing eyes. I'm going to be staying here for a while, Evelyn continued, keeping her voice gentle and even. I'm going to help your father with the house and the ranch, and I'm going to help take care of you, if that's all right. Still nothing. Evelyn's throat tightened. What did you say to a child who'd lost his mother, who'd retreated so far into silence that no one could reach him? How did you promise you wouldn't leave when every adult in his short life who'd promised that was already gone? I lost someone too, she said finally, the words coming without planning. My husband. He died a few weeks ago, so I understand a little bit about what it feels like when someone you love is just gone. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, not quite interest, but maybe recognition, the acknowledgement that this stranger understood something he thought was his alone. I'm not trying to replace your mother, Evelyn said firmly. I couldn't do that even if I wanted to. Your mother was yours, and nothing will ever change that. But I'm going to be here, every morning, every night, and if you ever want to talk to me or show me something or just sit quietly together, I'll be here for that too. Ethan continued to watch her, his expression unreadable. Evelyn took a small step into the room, then stopped. I know you don't know me yet. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm making you a promise anyway. I won't leave. No matter how hard things get, no matter how long it takes for you to feel safe with me, I will be here. You don't have to believe me now, but maybe someday you will. She waited, hoping for some response, a nod, a blink, anything that showed he'd heard and understood. Ethan slowly uncurled from his defensive position and slid off the bed. Evelyn's breath caught as he crossed the room toward her, certain he was going to ask her to leave, to go away, to stop pretending she could ever be what he needed. Instead, he reached under his bed and pulled out a worn wooden horse, small enough to fit in his hands, carved with obvious care, the paint fading from years of love and play. He held it out to her, his eyes never leaving her face. Evelyn knelt down, bringing herself to his level, understanding somehow that this was a test, an offering, a question posed without words. Is this your horse? She asked gently. Ethan nodded. It's beautiful. Did someone make it for you? Another nod. May I hold it? Ethan placed the wooden horse carefully in her hands. It was warm from being held, smooth from countless hours of small fingers running over the carved surface. Evelyn turned it over gently, seeing the detail in the work, the flowing mane, the carefully shaped hooves, the eyes that seemed almost alive. This is very special, she said softly, handing it back to him. Thank you for showing it to me. Ethan didn't take it back. Instead, he closed her fingers around it and stepped away, his meaning clear. It was hers now, at least for a while. A gift. A tentative bridge across the silence. Evelyn's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. I'll take very good care of it, she promised. And when you want it back, you just let me know. The boy nodded once, then climbed back onto his bed, resuming his watchful position. But something in his posture had changed, some small tension easing. Evelyn stood, clutching the wooden horse like it was made of gold. Thank you, Ethan, she said. I'll see you at breakfast. She closed the door quietly and leaned against the wall in the hallway, her legs suddenly weak. Lucas was standing at the top of the stairs, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. He gave it to me, Evelyn said, holding up the wooden horse. Why would he? That horse hasn't left his possession since his mother died, Lucas said quietly. He sleeps with it. Won't let me touch it. He paused. His mother carved it for him the week before she got sick. Evelyn looked down at the wooden toy in her hands, understanding now the weight of what Ethan had given her. Not just a toy, a piece of his mother, a piece of his heart. The ceremony is in 3 days, Lucas said, but I think the decision's already been made, by both of you. Evelyn nodded, unable to speak past the emotion lodged in her throat. Lucas descended the stairs, leaving her alone in the hallway with a wooden horse and a promise she'd made to a silent child, a promise she had no idea how to keep, but would die trying to honor. 3 days, she thought. 3 days until this impossible arrangement became legally binding. 3 days until she became wife to a stranger and mother to a boy who'd already lost too much. 3 days to figure out how to build a life out of desperation and necessity and the fragile hope that survival could somehow become something more. Evelyn went to her room, her temporary room, soon to be permanent, and placed the wooden horse carefully on the nightstand where she could see it. Then she dressed in her threadbare clothes, went downstairs, and began learning how to live in a house that had forgotten what living meant. Lucas taught her the morning routine, how he liked his coffee, where the spare linens were kept, how to work the cast iron stove without burning herself. He showed her the root cellar, the chicken coop, the barn with its 2 aging horses and single milk cow. The ranch was smaller than she'd thought, more worn down, struggling under the weight of too much loss and not enough hands to maintain it. But it was solid, real, a place where 3 broken people might find enough shelter to begin healing if they were willing to try. That night, Evelyn slept in Lucas's bedroom, her bedroom now, with the wooden horse on the nightstand and Ethan's room just on the other side of the wall. She woke twice to the sound of crying, soft and muffled, a child grieving alone in the dark. Each time she rose and stood outside his door, listening, ready to go to him if he called. He never called. But on the 3rd morning, when Evelyn went to wake him for breakfast, she found him standing beside her bed, the wooden horse clutched in his hands, his eyes red from crying. "Bad dream?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "Do you want to tell me about it?" He shook his head. "That's all right." Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." Ethan stood there uncertainly, clearly wanting something but unable or unwilling to ask for it. "Would you like to sit with me for a while?" Evelyn offered. "Just until you feel better?" The boy climbed up onto the bed beside her, still clutching his horse, and leaned against her side. Evelyn sat very still, barely breathing, afraid to do anything that might break this fragile moment of trust. They sat together as dawn light filled the room, the child finding comfort in presence alone, the woman learning that sometimes the best promises were the ones kept in silence. That afternoon, the circuit preacher arrived, a thin, weathered man who'd married and buried half the territory and asked no questions about arrangements that were none of his business. He performed the ceremony in the main room with Ethan as their only witness, speaking words about duty and commitment and honoring one's vows that felt both sacred and hollow in equal measure. When it came time to seal the marriage with a kiss, Lucas and Evelyn looked at each other across an impossible distance and settled for a handshake instead. The preacher raised an eyebrow but said nothing, marked their names in his register, and departed with the payment Lucas had negotiated, 2 chickens and a promise of shelter next time he passed through. And just like that, Evelyn Crow became Evelyn Blackwood, wife, mother, partner in survival. The sun set on her first day of marriage to a man she barely knew, in a house that needed her, with a child who might someday trust her enough to speak. It wasn't love, but it was enough. For now, it was enough. The first week of marriage passed in a careful dance of strangers learning to share space without collision. Evelyn woke each morning to the sound of Lucas already moving through the house, his heavy footsteps a reliable rhythm that marked the hours before dawn. By the time she descended the stairs, he would be dressed and heading out to tend the animals, leaving her alone with the silence and the sleeping child upstairs. She learned the house slowly, opening cupboards and drawers with the hesitation of someone who knew she had the right to be here but didn't quite believe it yet. The kitchen was sparse but functional. Cast iron pots worn smooth from use, a collection of mismatched dishes, flour and cornmeal stored in tin containers that bore the dents and scratches of years. Everything spoke of a woman who had once cared for this house, who had organized these shelves and chosen these places, and who was now conspicuously absent. Evelyn tried not to think about her too much. The first Mrs. Blackwood, the woman whose shadow filled every corner of this house, whose child still grieved her loss, whose husband had loved her enough to still keep her wedding ring in a small wooden box on the mantel. Evelyn had seen it her second day here, had opened the box without thinking, and found the delicate gold band inside, polished and cared for, waiting for no one. She had closed the box quickly and never opened it again. Lucas came in from the morning chores as Evelyn was setting breakfast on the table. Eggs from the chickens she was still learning to manage, bread she'd baked the day before that had turned out denser than intended, coffee strong enough to strip paint. He ate without comment, his attention already somewhere else, planning the day's work with the single-minded focus of a man who used labor to avoid thinking about anything deeper. "I need to ride out to the north pasture today," he said, sopping up egg yolk with bread. "Check the fence line before the next storm hits. I'll be gone most of the day." Evelyn nodded, her stomach tightening at the thought of being left alone with Ethan for so many hours. In the weeks since the ceremony, the boy had maintained his silence, watching her with those grave, dark eyes, but offering nothing beyond the occasional nod or shake of his head. He ate when she placed food before him, dressed when she laid out clothes, followed basic instructions without protest, but he remained locked behind walls she had no idea how to scale. "Will Ethan be all right with me?" she asked, hating how uncertain she sounded. Lucas looked up from his plate, studying her with that assessing gaze she was beginning to recognize. "He'll be fine. Just keep him inside if the weather turns, and don't let him wander off. He's gotten into the habit of walking out to the barn and not telling anyone." "How am I supposed to stop him if he doesn't tell me he's going?" Something that might have been dark amusement crossed Lucas's face. "Figure it out. You're his mother now." The words landed like stones, heavy and undeniable. Evelyn wanted to protest that she wasn't, that being married to Lucas didn't make her Ethan's mother any more than standing in a barn made her a horse. But Lucas was already standing, already reaching for his coat and hat, already leaving. "There's venison in the cold box if you want to make stew for supper," he said from the door, "and the roof over the back porch has been leaking. Mind you don't hang anything out there to dry until I can patch it." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with solid finality, and Evelyn was alone with the child upstairs and the weight of responsibility she had no idea how to carry. She washed the breakfast dishes slowly, listening to the sounds of the house, the tick of the clock on the mantel, the creak of floorboards settling, the wind beginning to pick up outside. When she could delay no longer, she climbed the stairs to Ethan's room and knocked softly. No answer, as always. She opened the door to find him sitting on the floor with a collection of wooden animals spread around him, a cow, a pig, several chickens, and the horse he'd given her that first morning and that she'd returned to him the next day. He was arranging them in careful patterns, moving them with the focused intensity of a child building worlds in his imagination. "Good morning, Ethan," Evelyn said, keeping her voice gentle. "Your father's gone out to check the fences. It's just you and me today." The boy looked up at her, his expression unreadable, then returned his attention to his animals. Evelyn sat down on the floor a few feet away from him, close enough to be present, but far enough to give him space. "What are you playing?" Ethan moved the cow closer to the chickens, then positioned the pig near the horse. He didn't answer, didn't acknowledge the question, just continued his careful arrangement. "Is that your farm?" Evelyn tried again. "Are the animals getting ready for winter?" Nothing. She watched him play for a long moment, searching for some way to reach him, some bridge across the silence that kept growing wider the harder she tried to cross it. Finally, she stood and brushed off her skirt. "I'll be downstairs if you need me," she said. "Come down when you're hungry for lunch." She was halfway to the door when Ethan picked up the wooden horse and held it out to her, his eyes finally meeting hers. Evelyn's breath caught. "You want me to have it again?" He nodded. "Just for today or to keep?" Ethan considered this, then made a motion with his hands, a sweeping gesture that seemed to mean something, though Evelyn couldn't decipher what. "I don't understand, sweetheart," she admitted. "Can you show me?" The boy set down the horse and picked up the cow instead, placing it deliberately in Evelyn's palm. Then he picked up the pig and added it to her hand. Then the chickens, one by one, until she was holding the entire wooden menagerie. "You want me to play with them?" Evelyn asked. Ethan shook his head and pointed at the empty floor where the animals had been arranged. Understanding dawned slowly. "You want me to take care of them, like I take care of the real animals?" The nod was definite, confirmed. Evelyn looked down at the wooden toys in her hands, suddenly understanding the weight of what he was offering. These weren't just playthings. They were his world, his security, the things he controlled when everything else in his life had spiraled beyond his grasp, and he was trusting her with them. "I'll take very good care of them," she promised, her throat tight. "Just like I take care of the real chickens and the real cow." Ethan picked up the horse last and placed it carefully on top of the others in her cupped hands. Then he stood and walked past her out of the room, heading downstairs with the expectation that she would follow. Evelyn did, cradling the wooden animals like they were made of spun glass. The day unfolded in careful increments. Evelyn set the wooden animals on the windowsill in the kitchen where Ethan could see them while she worked. She peeled potatoes for stew, chopped carrots, prepared the venison Lucas had mentioned. Ethan sat at the table with a slate and chalk, drawing pictures she couldn't quite decipher. Animals, maybe, or people, or just the abstract shapes that lived in a child's imagination. Around noon, the wind picked up in earnest, rattling the windows and sending snow skittering across the frozen ground. Evelyn glanced outside nervously, remembering Lucas's warning about storms, about keeping Ethan inside, about not letting him wander. She turned to check on him and found his chair empty. Her heart lurched. "Ethan?" No answer. She moved quickly through the downstairs rooms, the main room, the small parlor they never used, the back porch with its leaking roof. No sign of him. She took the stairs two at a time, checking his room, her room, the spare room Lucas now used. Empty, all of them. Panic rising, Evelyn grabbed her shawl and pushed out the front door into the cutting wind. The barn stood dark against the white landscape, its door slightly ajar. Of course, Lucas had said he wandered out to the barn. Evelyn ran across the frozen yard, her boots slipping on ice, her shawl whipping around her shoulders. She yanked open the barn door and stepped into the dim interior that smelled of hay and horses and old leather. "Ethan?" she called, her voice sharp with fear and anger and relief all tangled together. A small sound came from the back of the barn. A hiccup, or maybe a sob. She found him in one of the empty stalls, curled up in the hay with his arms wrapped around his knees, crying with the silent, shaking intensity of a child who had learned that making noise changed nothing. Evelyn's anger evaporated. She knelt beside him in the hay, not touching, just present. "You scared me," she said quietly. "I didn't know where you'd gone." Ethan didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her presence, just continued crying in that awful, silent way. "Is this where you come when you're sad?" Evelyn asked. "When you miss your mama?" The words seemed to break something loose. Ethan's crying intensified, his small body shaking harder, and without thinking, Evelyn gathered him into her lap and held him close, rocking slightly, offering the only comfort she knew how to give. He stiffened at first, his body going rigid against hers, but she didn't let go. She just held him, one hand on his back, one hand cradling his head, murmuring wordless sounds of comfort the way her own mother had done when Evelyn was small and the world felt too big and frightening to bear. Gradually, Ethan relaxed into her embrace. His crying began to slow, the shaking subsiding into occasional hitches of breath. Evelyn continued to hold him, continued to rock, her own tears sliding down her cheeks to disappear in his dark hair. "I know," she whispered. "I know it hurts. I know you miss her. I know nothing feels right anymore." They sat together in the hay while the wind howled outside and snow began to fall in earnest, the child grieving and the woman holding him through it, both understanding that some pain was too deep for words. Eventually, Ethan's breathing evened out. He didn't pull away from her, but he shifted slightly in her arms, and Evelyn loosened her hold enough to let him move. He looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes and reached up to touch her face, his small fingers tracing the tear tracks on her cheeks. His expression held confusion, a question she could read even without words. "I'm crying because you're crying," Evelyn explained softly, "because it hurts to see you hurt. Because I wish I could fix it, and I can't." Ethan studied her face for a long moment, his fingers still resting against her cheek. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he whispered a single word. "Mama." Evelyn's heart stopped. "What?" But Ethan had already tucked his head back against her shoulder, the moment passing as quickly as it had come, leaving her uncertain whether she'd truly heard it or had only imagined what she desperately wanted to be real. "Come on," she said finally, her voice rough with emotion. "Let's get you back inside before you freeze." She carried him across the yard, his arms wrapped around her neck, his face buried against her shoulder. The wind cut through her shawl like knives, but she barely felt it, too focused on the precious weight in her arms, the trust that felt more fragile than anything she'd ever held. Back in the house, she set him down and brushed the hay from his clothes, from his hair, and from her own. She built up the fire until the room was warm again, then settled him at the table with hot milk and bread with butter while she returned to the abandoned stew. Ethan ate in silence, watching her move around the kitchen with eyes that seemed less guarded than before, more curious, more willing to see. Your father will be home soon, Evelyn said, stirring the stew. Are you going to tell him you went to the barn? Ethan shook his head. You know you're not supposed to go out there alone. Another shake. But you did it anyway. A pause, then a small nod. Evelyn set down her spoon and turned to face him. I'm not going to tell on you, but I need you to promise me something. If you need to go to the barn, if you need to be alone, you come tell me first. You don't have to say it out loud. You can just tap my arm or point or whatever feels right. But I need to know where you are, Ethan. I can't keep you safe if I don't know where you are. Ethan considered this, his small face serious. Finally, he nodded. Is that a promise? Another nod, more definite this time. All right then. Evelyn returned to her stirring. When you're finished with your milk, you can go play in your room if you want, or you can stay down here with me. Either way is fine. She expected him to retreat upstairs, to seek the solitude and safety of his room. Instead, Ethan finished his milk and climbed down from his chair, retrieving his slate and chalk from where he'd abandoned them. He settled on the floor near the stove, where the warmth was greatest, and began drawing again, content to be near without demanding attention. Evelyn worked around him, peeling and chopping and stirring, glancing over occasionally to see what he was creating. The drawings were clearer now that she knew what to look for. A house with smoke rising from the chimney, stick figures that might be people, animals arranged in careful rows. A family, she realized. He was drawing a family. Lucas returned as dusk was falling, stamping snow from his boots and bringing the cold in with him. He hung his coat and hat by the door, his face ruddy from wind and exertion, and stopped short when he saw Ethan on the floor drawing instead of hiding in his room. Everything all right? He asked, his eyes moving between the boy and Evelyn with something like suspicion. Fine, Evelyn said, ladling stew into bowls. Just a quiet day. Lucas looked like he wanted to ask more, but Ethan had gathered his slate and moved to the table, settling into his usual spot without prompting. Lucas washed his hands at the basin and joined them, the three of them eating in the companionable silence that had become their dinner ritual. Halfway through the meal, Ethan set down his spoon and pushed his slate across the table toward his father. Lucas picked it up, studying the drawing, his expression unreadable. That's real good, son, he said finally, his voice rough. That the ranch? Ethan nodded. And that's the three of us? Another nod. Lucas looked at Evelyn, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe, or the beginning of understanding that they were building something here. Something fragile, but real. We look happy, Lucas said, handing the slate back to Ethan. That's real good. The days began to find rhythm after that. Lucas rose before dawn to tend the animals and check the buildings, returning for breakfast that Evelyn learned to time perfectly. Eggs and bacon, biscuits that improved with each attempt, coffee that Lucas drank without complaint even when it was too strong or too weak. Ethan came downstairs when called, eating whatever was put before him, gradually becoming more comfortable with the routine. Evelyn threw herself into the work of the household with the same desperate focus she'd once used to cross the frozen prairie. She scrubbed floors that didn't need scrubbing, reorganized cupboards that were already organized, mended clothes that had only the smallest tears. She baked bread every other day, churned butter when the cream was ready, collected eggs and fed chickens and learned to milk the cow without getting kicked. The work was endless and exhausting and exactly what she needed. Proof that she belonged here, that she was earning her place, that marriage to Lucas Blackwood was more than just shelter from the storm. But the nights were harder. She lay awake in the master bedroom that still felt like someone else's room, listening to the house settle around her, to Lucas's footsteps in the spare room down the hall, to Ethan's occasional cries that came less frequently but still tore at her heart. She would rise and stand outside the boy's door, listening, ready to go to him if he called, but he never did. Just cried himself back to sleep in that silent, shaking way that made her want to break down his door and gather him close whether he wanted it or not. She never did, though. Just stood in the hallway until the crying stopped, then returned to her own bed and her own sleeplessness. 2 weeks after the ceremony, a cold snap hit that sent the temperatures plunging well below zero. Lucas spent most of his time breaking ice on water troughs and making sure the animals had shelter, coming in only long enough to eat and warm himself before heading back out. Evelyn kept the fires burning hot, kept soup simmering on the stove, kept Ethan close and occupied with the wooden animals and his slate drawings. On the third night of bitter cold, she woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Not Ethan's light tread, but Lucas's heavy one. She heard him pause outside her door, heard what sounded like a hand placed flat against the wood, then heard him move on toward the stairs. Curious and concerned, Evelyn rose and pulled on her robe, following the sound of movement to the kitchen. She found Lucas standing at the stove in his undershirt and trousers, his feet bare on the cold floor, stirring something in a pot. "Is everything all right?" she asked from the doorway. He turned, startled, clearly not expecting her to be awake. "Couldn't sleep, didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." Evelyn moved into the room, pulling her robe tighter against the chill that even the banked fire couldn't quite dispel. "What are you making?" "Milk. My mother used to heat milk when I couldn't sleep." He looked embarrassed admitting it. "Stupid habit." "It's not stupid." Evelyn joined him at the stove, taking in the tense set of his shoulders, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "Would you like me to finish that while you sit down?" "I can manage." "I know you can, but you don't have to." Lucas looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in days. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you," Evelyn said honestly. "I thought you'd be harder, colder." "Maybe I am." "No." She took the spoon from his hand, their fingers brushing briefly. "You're not. You're just tired and grieving and trying to hold everything together by yourself." Lucas stepped back from the stove, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "I heard Ethan crying earlier, heard you in the hallway outside his room. He doesn't want me to come in. He doesn't want anyone, but you stand there anyway." Lucas met her eyes. "Why?" "Because he needs to know someone's there. Even if he doesn't want comfort yet, he needs to know he's not alone." "And what about you?" The question came quietly. "Who stands in the hallway for you?" The words hit somewhere tender, somewhere Evelyn had been trying not to examine too closely. "I don't need anyone in the hallway." "Everyone needs someone in the hallway." Lucas took the cup of warm milk she offered, holding it without drinking. "My wife. My first wife. She used to say that grief is just love with nowhere to go, that it needs somewhere to land or it poisons everything it touches." It was the first time he'd spoken about her directly, voluntarily. Evelyn held very still, afraid to break the moment. "She died because I wasn't here," Lucas continued, his voice flat but his eyes betraying the depth of feeling beneath. "I was in town buying supplies, gone 2 days. When I came back, she already had the fever. 3 days later, she was gone. Ethan hasn't spoken since." "That's not your fault?" "Isn't it?" He finally sipped the milk, grimacing slightly at the temperature. "I should have been here. Should have gotten the doctor sooner. Should have done something other than watch her burn up from the inside while I stood there useless." Evelyn thought about her own husband, about the fever that had taken him, about the helplessness of watching someone die and knowing there was nothing you could do to stop it. Illness doesn't care about should, it just takes what it wants. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No, it's supposed to make you stop punishing yourself for being human." Lucas set down his cup with more force than necessary. "You've been here 2 weeks, and you think you know me?" "I know grief," Evelyn said firmly. "I know what it looks like when someone's drowning in it. And I know that blaming yourself won't bring her back, won't help Ethan, and won't make any of this easier." They stood facing each other across the kitchen, the tension thick enough to touch. Finally, Lucas's shoulders sagged. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "How to be a father to a boy who won't speak. How to run a ranch that's falling apart. How to be a husband to a woman I married out of desperation." "Then we figure it out together," Evelyn said. "That's what partners do, isn't it? We muddle through and hope we get more right than wrong. Is that what we are? Partners? What else would we be?" Lucas studied her in the dim light, his expression impossible to read. "I don't know. I honestly don't know." They finished their milk in silence, the moment of vulnerability passing as quickly as it had come. Lucas rinsed his cup and headed back toward the stairs, pausing at the doorway. "Evelyn?" "Yes?" "Thank you for standing in the hallway, for Ethan." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the kitchen with cooling milk and the understanding that this marriage might be built on necessity, but it didn't have to stay that way forever. The next morning brought fresh snow and clearer skies. Lucas came in from the barn earlier than usual, his expression troubled. "The cow's sick," he said without preamble. "Not eating, not producing, might be milk fever." Evelyn's stomach dropped. The cow was their only source of fresh milk, and losing her in winter could mean the difference between survival and slow starvation. "What do we do?" "I'll ride to town, get the veterinarian if he'll come. Meantime, you keep her warm and keep trying to get her to drink." He was already pulling on his heavy coat. "I'll be gone most of the day, maybe overnight if the weather turns." Is there anything specific?" "Just do your best." Lucas paused, his hand on the door. "And Evelyn?" "Keep Ethan inside, no matter what." She nodded, and he was gone, riding out into the gray morning on the stronger of their two horses. Evelyn spent the morning between the house and the barn, checking on the cow, trying to coax her to eat or drink, bundling herself against the cold for each trip across the yard. Ethan stayed inside as instructed, watching from the window with worried eyes that understood more than he could say. By afternoon, the cow was worse, lying down in her stall, breathing labored, eyes dull and unfocused. Evelyn knelt beside her in the hay, stroking her neck, whispering pointless comfort while fear gnawed at her insides. They needed this animal, couldn't afford to lose her, couldn't afford to... A small hand tugged at her sleeve. She turned to find Ethan standing beside her, his wooden cow clutched in one hand, his expression solemn. He'd followed her to the barn despite being told to stay inside, but Evelyn couldn't summon the energy to scold him. "She's sick, sweetheart," Evelyn said quietly. "I'm trying to help her, but I don't know what to do." Ethan knelt beside her in the hay and placed his wooden cow gently next to the real one's head, as though his toy could provide comfort or healing through proximity. Then he looked up at Evelyn and opened his mouth. "Sing," he whispered. The word was so unexpected, so utterly startling that Evelyn wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. "What?" "Mama sang," Ethan said, each word clearly difficult but pushed out anyway. "When things were sick, she sang." Tears sprang to Evelyn's eyes. "Oh, Ethan, I told you, I can't sing." "Try." His small hand found hers. "Please." So Evelyn tried. She had no voice for singing, no memory of melodies, no knowledge of the songs his mother might have used, but she hummed anyway, a tuneless, wandering sound that was more breath than music, more intention than skill. And Ethan, still holding her hand, hummed with her. They sat together in the barn while the afternoon light faded, humming their graceless song to a dying cow, the woman and the child finding harmony in their shared inadequacy. When Lucas returned near midnight with the veterinarian in tow, they found Evelyn asleep in the hay with Ethan curled against her side. The wooden cow still positioned near the real one's head, like a talisman against loss. The real cow, somehow, was standing. The veterinarian, a gruff man named Holloway, who smelled of tobacco and horse liniment, examined the cow with practiced efficiency while Lucas carried a sleeping Ethan back to the house. Evelyn stood shivering in the barn doorway, exhaustion making her sway on her feet, watching Holloway's weathered hands probe and assess. "Milk fever, like you thought," he said finally, straightening up with a grunt. "But she's past the worst of it. Another day and you'd have lost her for sure, but whatever you did kept her going long enough for her body to start fighting back." "I didn't do anything," Evelyn said. "Just sat with her." Holloway gave her a long look, his eyes shrewd beneath bushy gray brows. "Sometimes that's enough. Animals know when they're not alone. Makes a difference." He packed his instruments back into his worn leather bag. "Keep her warm, get her drinking again gradually, and she should pull through. You got lucky, Mrs. Blackwood." Lucas returned as Holloway was saddling his horse to leave, pressing payment into the veterinarian's hand despite the man's protests about the late hour and the distance. "I knew the risk when I took up this profession," Holloway said, swinging into his saddle with surprising grace for a man his age. "Besides, your wife saved me a harder job. Finding a replacement milk cow this time of year would have cost you 3 times what you just paid me." He rode off into the darkness, leaving Lucas and Evelyn standing in the barn with the recovering cow and the heavy silence that had become their default mode of communication. "You should be inside," Lucas said finally. "You'll catch your death out here." "So will you." "I need to settle the horses, make sure everything's secure for the night." Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself, the cold seeping through her coat now that the adrenaline was fading. "Ethan spoke today." Lucas's hand stilled on the saddle he'd been adjusting. "What?" "2 words. Sing and mama. He said his mother used to sing to sick animals." She paused, watching Lucas's face in the dim lantern light. "I tried. I can't sing worth a damn, but I tried anyway." Lucas was quiet for so long that Evelyn thought he wasn't going to respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he was fighting to contain. "She did. Sing to them, I mean. Used to drive me crazy, said I was being foolish, that animals didn't care about music. She'd just smile and keep singing anyway." He turned away, busying himself with unnecessary adjustments to the tack hanging on the wall. "What did he call you?" "I'm not sure he was calling me anything. He was just remembering what his mother did." "No." Lucas faced her again, his expression intense. "You said he said mama. Was he talking about Catherine, or was he talking to you?" Evelyn's throat tightened. She'd been trying not to think about that too carefully, trying not to hope for something that might not be real. "I don't know. It happened so fast, and then he didn't say anything else." "But he spoke." Lucas crossed the space between them in 2 strides, gripping her shoulders with hands that trembled slightly. "After 6 months of nothing, he spoke. To you. Because of the cow, because he was worried, because he trusts you." Lucas's hands gentled but didn't release her. "Because somewhere in that silence, he decided you were safe enough to talk to." They stood close together in the cold barn, the moment stretching between them like something fragile and new. Evelyn could feel the heat of Lucas's body through their coats, could see the exhaustion and grief, and something else. Something that might have been gratitude, or might have been the beginning of something neither of them was ready to name, written across his face. "I should check on him," she said softly. Lucas released her immediately, stepping back, the walls slamming back into place between them. "Right. Yes. I'll finish up here." Evelyn fled to the house, her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold or the sick cow or the miracle of Ethan's voice. She climbed the stairs quietly and looked in on the boy, finding him deeply asleep with his wooden animals arranged carefully on his pillow. The wooden cow was missing, still in the barn where he'd left it as a gift or a prayer or whatever 4-year-olds offered when they were trying to save something they loved. She retrieved it, brushing off the hay, and placed it gently with the others. Ethan stirred but didn't wake, his face peaceful in sleep in a way it never was during waking hours. Evelyn stood watching him for a long moment, this child who wasn't hers but was becoming hers anyway, whether she'd planned for it or not. He'd spoken today. 2 words that might mean everything or might mean nothing, but they were 2 words more than he'd given anyone in half a year. She thought about what Lucas had said, that Ethan trusted her. The responsibility of that trust felt enormous, terrifying, like being handed something precious made of glass and being told not to drop it while walking across ice. Sleep came fitfully that night, her mind replaying the day's events on an endless loop. The sick cow, Ethan's whispered words, Lucas's hands on her shoulders, the look in his eyes that she didn't know how to interpret. She woke before dawn feeling more tired than when she'd gone to bed, the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on her chest like stones. The house was still dark when she descended to the kitchen, but she found Lucas already there, building up the fire in the stove with the mechanical efficiency of long practice. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face, before settling back into his usual neutral expression. "Never sleep well after a crisis. Keep thinking about everything that could have gone wrong." "But didn't." Evelyn moved to the stove, taking over the fire building without asking permission. "The cow's going to be fine," Ethan spoke, "and we're all still standing. That's got to count for something." Standing isn't the same as living. The words were bitter, heavy with meanings Evelyn was only beginning to understand. She straightened from the stove, studying Lucas in the growing light, the lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like a man expecting the next blow to fall any moment. "No," she agreed quietly. But it's a start. They made breakfast together in silence that felt less hostile than usual, almost companionable. When Ethan came downstairs rubbing sleep from his eyes, he accepted his plate without comment and ate steadily, his attention moving between the two adults with an intensity that suggested he was learning to read the currents that flowed between them. "I'm going to check on the cow," Lucas said when the meal was finished. "Then I need to ride out to the south pasture. There's a section of fence that needs mending before the next storm." "Can I come?" The words burst out of Ethan before Evelyn or Lucas could react, high and clear and shocking in their suddenness. Lucas froze with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "What did you say?" Ethan's face flushed, uncertainty flickering across his features, but he pushed forward anyway. "Can I come with you to fix the fence?" "That's—" Lucas set down his cup carefully, as though sudden movement might shatter whatever spell had been broken to allow speech to return. "That's outdoor work, son. Cold work. You might get bored." "I won't." Ethan's hands twisted together in his lap. "Please, Papa, I want to help." "Papa." The word hung in the air like a benediction, and Evelyn watched Lucas's face transform, grief and joy and pain all tangling together until she couldn't tell where one ended and another began. "All right," Lucas said, his voice not quite steady. "All right, you can come. But you do exactly what I say, understand? Stay close. Stay safe." Ethan nodded vigorously, already sliding down from his chair, already running to get his coat and boots with the uncomplicated enthusiasm of a child given permission for an adventure. Lucas looked at Evelyn across the table, his expression helpless. "He called me Papa." "I heard." "He hasn't, not since Catherine—" Lucas stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "He's coming back to you," Evelyn said softly. "To both of us. Maybe not all at once, maybe not in ways we expect, but he's coming back." Lucas nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and went to help Ethan bundle up against the cold. Evelyn watched them leave together, the tall man and the small boy, walking side by side toward the barn, and felt something shift in her chest, some locked door beginning to open. She spent the day on tasks that didn't require deep thought, laundry scrubbed on the washboard until her knuckles were raw, bread kneaded until the dough was smooth and elastic, floors swept until not a speck of dust remained. Work that let her mind wander to dangerous territories, to what it might mean that Ethan had called her mama, had called Lucas Papa, had spoken at all after so much silence. To what it might mean that Lucas had looked at her last night like she was something more than a convenient solution to an impossible problem. To what she might be starting to feel about this strange family she'd stumbled into out of desperation and was now choosing to stay in for reasons that had nothing to do with survival. They returned as the afternoon light was fading, both of them red-cheeked from cold and exertion. Ethan was chattering, actually chattering, about the fence and the wire and how Papa had let him hold the hammer, words tumbling over each other in a rush to make up for months of silence. And then the wire snapped and Papa said a bad word, but he said, "Don't tell Mama because she might get mad." And I said, "I won't tell, but I'm telling you now, but you're not mad, are you, Mama?" The question was directed at Evelyn, and the word Mama was delivered with such casual certainty that her breath caught. Not a slip of the tongue this time, not a memory of someone else, a deliberate choice. "I'm not mad," she managed, her voice rough. "But maybe Papa should watch his language around little boys with big ears." "Sorry," Lucas said, not sounding sorry at all, his eyes warm as they met hers over Ethan's head. "Won't happen again." "It will definitely happen again," Evelyn countered, surprising herself with the teasing note in her voice. "But maybe next time you'll remember to wait until small people aren't listening." Ethan giggled, an actual giggle, high and clear. And the sound was so unexpected, so perfect, that both adults stopped and stared at him. "What?" Ethan asked, his laughter fading into uncertainty. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Lucas said quickly, kneeling down to his son's level. "Nothing at all. I miss that sound, your laugh." "I laugh," Ethan protested. "You do now." Lucas pulled the boy into a fierce hug, his face buried in Ethan's hair. "You do now." Evelyn turned away to give them privacy, busying herself with setting the table for supper, her own eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. This was what healing looked like, she realized. Not dramatic breakthroughs or sudden transformations, but small moments of normal. A child's laugh, a father's hug, the return of speech. One halting word at a time. Dinner that night was different from all the silent meals that had come before. Ethan talked almost non-stop, making up for lost time, telling Evelyn everything he'd seen and done with the breathless enthusiasm of a child who'd discovered that words could be trusted again. Lucas let him talk, interjecting occasionally to correct exaggerations or add details, his whole demeanor softer than Evelyn had ever seen it. After the meal, Ethan helped clear the table without being asked, chattering about the fence and the horses and whether they could go again tomorrow. Please, Papa, please. We'll see, Lucas said, which Evelyn was learning meant yes. Now go get ready for bed. It's past your bedtime already. Will you tuck me in? Ethan asked, looking between his father and Evelyn with equal hope. Both of you? Lucas glanced at Evelyn, a question in his eyes. She nodded. They climbed the stairs together, the three of them, and Evelyn felt the strangeness of it, this family ritual she'd never imagined being part of, this intimacy of bedtime routines and goodnight kisses. Ethan changed into his nightshirt and climbed into bed, arranging his wooden animals on the pillow with the careful precision of ceremony. Story? He asked hopefully. It's late, Lucas started, but Evelyn cut him off. One short story, your father's choice since he did the hard work of fence mending today. Lucas looked uncomfortable, then resigned. He sat on the edge of Ethan's bed, thinking for a moment, then began. When I was about your age, my father took me out to mend fences for the first time. I was so excited I barely slept the night before. But when we got out there, I realized I didn't know what to do. Didn't know how to hold the tools right. Didn't know which wire went where. I was afraid my father would think I was useless. Ethan was listening intently, his eyes wide. But my father, he just showed me slowly, patient-like. Showed me how to grip the pliers, how to twist the wire, how to test if it was tight enough. And when I got it wrong, which I did, plenty of times, he'd just say, try again, and let me keep trying until I got it right. Like you did with me today, Ethan said. Like I did with you today, Lucas confirmed. Because that's what fathers do. They teach their sons, and they're patient while they learn, and they let them make mistakes because that's how you get better at things. Did you get better? Eventually, took a while, but eventually I could mend fence as good as my father. Better, even, once I got grown. Lucas smoothed Ethan's hair back from his forehead. And someday you'll be better at it than me. That's how it works. Will Mama teach me things too? Ethan asked, and the casual use of the title made Evelyn's heart clench. Lucas looked at her, leaving the question for her to answer. I'll teach you everything I know, Evelyn said softly, moving to sit on the other side of the bed. Which might not be fence mending, but there's other important things, like how to make bread that doesn't turn out like a rock, and how to tell when the chickens are about to peck you, and how to sing to sick cows even when you can't carry a tune. Ethan smiled sleepily. That's good things to know. Very good things, Evelyn agreed. She leaned down and kissed his forehead, the gesture feeling both foreign and natural at once. Sleep now. We'll all still be here in the morning. Promise? The question was directed at both of them, and Evelyn understood it wasn't just about tomorrow morning. It was about all the mornings, all the promises that had been broken when his mother died, all the fears that the people he loved might disappear without warning. Promise, Lucas said firmly. Promise, Evelyn echoed. Ethan nodded, satisfied, and closed his eyes. They sat with him until his breathing deepened into sleep, then crept out quietly, leaving the door cracked open the way he liked it. In the hallway, they stood awkwardly, neither quite ready to retreat to their separate rooms, the intimacy of the moment they'd just shared still hanging between them. Thank you, Lucas said finally, for what you said to him, about teaching him things. I meant it. I know you did. That's why I'm thanking you. Lucas leaned against the wall, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. I didn't think it was possible, that he'd come back from where he'd gone, that we'd ever have this again, talking, laughing, normal things. You never stopped trying, though, never gave up on him. Didn't know what else to do besides keep showing up. Lucas's smile was bitter. Not much of a strategy, but it was all I had. It was enough. Evelyn wanted to reach out, to touch his arm or his hand or offer some physical comfort, but the space between them felt too charged, too dangerous. You were enough. I wasn't, though, not by myself. It took you being here, took you standing in the hallway and sitting in the barn and just being present. That's what made the difference. We made the difference, Evelyn corrected gently. Together. Lucas looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, some wall beginning to crack. Evelyn, A crash from downstairs cut off whatever he'd been about to say. They both froze, listening, then moved quickly toward the stairs. The sound had come from the kitchen, something heavy hitting the floor, glass breaking. They found the kitchen window shattered, cold air pouring in through the broken pane, and a rock the size of a fist lying in the middle of the floor, surrounded by glittering shards of glass. Wrapped around the rock was a piece of paper, secured with twine. Lucas picked it up carefully, unwrapping the paper and reading it by the lamplight. His face went hard, all the softness from moments ago vanishing like it had never existed. "What is it?" Evelyn asked, fear curling in her stomach. "Warning." Lucas's voice was flat. "Says I need to pay what I owe or there will be consequences." "Pay what? To who?" "Man named Garrett. He owns most of the land around here, fancies himself some kind of cattle baron." Lucas crumpled the note in his fist. "I borrowed money from him 2 years ago to expand the herd. Then Catherine got sick, and the herd, I lost most of them to disease last spring. Haven't been able to pay him back. How much do you owe?" Lucas named a sum that made Evelyn's knees weak. It was more money than she could imagine, more than a struggling ranch could hope to generate in years, let alone months. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "When we made our agreement, when I said I wanted honesty about finances." "Because it was my problem, not yours. My debt, my failure." Lucas moved to the broken window, examining the damage. "Thought I could handle it. Thought I had more time. And now? Now I don't know." He turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked truly defeated. "If I can't pay, he'll take the ranch, everything, and we'll have nothing." Evelyn's mind raced, calculating possibilities, searching for solutions that didn't exist. They had no savings, no valuable assets beyond the ranch itself, no way to generate the kind of money needed to satisfy this debt. "There has to be something we can do," she said. "Some way to negotiate, to buy more time. I've been negotiating for months. Garrett's patience is up. This rock through our window, that's him saying the negotiating is over. Then we fight. We go to the law. The law's in Garrett's pocket. Sheriff won't do anything to cross him." Lucas's laugh was harsh. "We're on our own here, Evelyn. Have been from the start." She wanted to argue, to insist there had to be another way. But the look on Lucas's face told her he'd already explored every option, already exhausted every possibility. This wasn't defeatism, this was reality. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Note says 2 weeks. After that..." He didn't finish the sentence. 2 weeks. 14 days to come up with an impossible sum of money or lose everything. The house, the land, the fragile family they were building piece by careful piece. Evelyn looked around the kitchen she'd worked so hard to make feel like home, thought about Ethan sleeping upstairs, about the life they were just beginning to build together, and felt rage replace fear. They hadn't survived this much. The frozen prairie, the grief, the silence, only to lose it all to some petty tyrant with a piece of paper saying he owned them. "No," she said. Lucas looked at her sharply. "No what?" "No, we're not giving up. No, we're not letting him take this from us. There has to be something we can do, some way to fight back." "Evelyn, you don't understand how this works. Then explain it to me." She moved to face him directly, her hands clenched into fists. "Explain how we're supposed to just accept this. Explain how we tell Ethan he has to leave the only home he's ever known. Explain how you give up the land you've bled for without even trying to save it." "I have been trying!" Lucas's control finally cracked, his voice rising. "I've been trying for months while you were still walking across the prairie thinking about your own problems. This isn't new, Evelyn. This is just the ending I've been expecting all along." The words hit like a slap, but Evelyn didn't back down. Fine. So you've been trying alone and it hasn't worked. Maybe it's time to try together.
And do what? Magic the money out of thin air? Pray for a miracle? If that's what it takes. Evelyn's voice was steel. I didn't walk 40 miles through a killing winter just to give up at the first real obstacle. I didn't marry you, didn't become mother to your child, didn't start building a life here just to watch it all get torn away without a fight. They stood facing each other in the ruined kitchen, glass crunching under their feet, cold air pouring through the broken window, the weight of impossible odds pressing down on them from all sides. I don't know how to fix this, Lucas admitted, and the rawness in his voice broke something in Evelyn's chest. Neither do I, she said. But we have 2 weeks to figure it out. So tomorrow, we start looking for solutions. We talk to everyone we know, we explore every option, we fight for this with everything we have. And if we lose anyway, then we lose together, as a family.
Evelyn reached out and took his hand, the first time she'd initiated physical contact since their handshake wedding day.
But we don't give up before we've even tried.
Lucas looked down at their joined hands, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, his fingers tightened around hers. All right, he said quietly. All right. We try. They stood together in the cold kitchen, hands clasped, facing an uncertain future with nothing but determination and each other. It wasn't much, but it was more than either of them had faced alone. And for now, that would have to be enough. They worked through the night boarding up the broken window with planks Lucas pulled from the barn, their breath misting in the cold air, speaking little but moving in synchronized rhythm that came from shared purpose. When the last nail was driven and the worst of the cold shut out, they stood back and surveyed their temporary repair, rough, ugly, but functional, like everything else they were building together. Get some sleep, Lucas said, gathering up the tools. Morning's going to come early. But Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in the darkness of her room listening to the house settle around her, her mind churning through possibilities that all led nowhere. They had no money, no assets, no leverage. What they had was a failing ranch, a recovered milk cow, 2 aging horses, and 14 days to produce a miracle. She rose before dawn and found Lucas already at the kitchen table, papers spread before him in the lamplight, ledgers, receipts, notes scrawled in margins. He looked up when she entered, his face haggard from sleeplessness. Can't make the numbers work, he said without preamble. No matter how I add it up, we're short, way short. Evelyn sat across from him, studying the papers covered in his careful handwriting. What if we sold the horses? Worth maybe a quarter of what we need, and we'd have no way to work the land or get to town. Lucas rubbed his eyes. Same problem with the cow. She's worth something, but not enough, and we'd lose our milk supply. The land itself, then, could we sell part of it? To who? Garrett owns everything around us. Anyone else would have to buy from him to get access, and he won't sell to anyone who'd help us. Evelyn traced the numbers on the page, searching for something Lucas had missed, some magical solution hiding in the arithmetic. There was nothing. Just deficit and debt and the cold reality of impossible choices. There has to be something, she insisted. Some skill we can trade, some service we can offer. In 2 weeks? Even if we could find work, we couldn't earn enough fast enough. Lucas gathered the papers into a pile, his movements sharp with frustration. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but sometimes the numbers just don't work. Sometimes you're beaten before you start. I don't accept that. Acceptance isn't required. It's just the truth. They were still arguing in tense whispers when Ethan appeared in the doorway, his wooden horse clutched to his chest, his eyes wide and frightened in a way that reminded Evelyn how much children understood even when adults tried to protect them. Are we in trouble? He asked, his newly returned voice small and uncertain. Lucas and Evelyn exchanged glances, a whole conversation passing wordlessly between them about how much to say, how much to shelter, how much truth a 4-year-old could bear. We're working through some problems, Lucas said finally, carefully. Adult problems. Nothing for you to worry about. But you're worried. Ethan moved into the room, climbing into Evelyn's lap without asking permission, seeking comfort from the tension he could feel crackling in the air. I can tell. Evelyn wrapped her arms around him, breathing in the little boy's smell of sleep and wood,
and the lavender soap she'd used on his hair the night before. "We are worried," she admitted, ignoring Lucas's sharp look. "But we're figuring it out together. That's what families do." "Is someone trying to hurt us?" The question was matter-of-fact, devastating in its directness. "Someone wants to take our home," Lucas said, his voice rough. "But we're going to try very hard to stop them." Ethan was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he slid off Evelyn's lap and ran upstairs, his footsteps quick and purposeful. He returned moments later with a small cloth bag that jingled when he set it on the table. "I have money," he announced. "From Grandpa, for my birthday. You can have it." Lucas opened the bag carefully, spilling out a collection of coins, mostly pennies and nickels, a few dimes, one precious quarter. Maybe $2 total. A fortune to a child. Nothing in the face of what they owed. "Ethan," Lucas's voice broke. He cleared his throat, tried again. "Son, this is yours. You keep it. But you need it for the house." Ethan pushed the bag toward his father. "Take it, please." Evelyn watched Lucas struggle with his composure, watched him gather his son into his arms and hold him fiercely, his face buried in Ethan's hair. When he finally spoke, his voice was muffled but steady. "Thank you. That's the bravest, most generous thing anyone's ever done for me." He pulled back to look Ethan in the eye. "But I'm going to give it back to you, and I'm going to tell you why. This money is yours. You earned it by being born, by being loved by your grandfather, by being you. And part of being a man, even a small man like you, is protecting what's yours and the people who are weaker than you. Someday, when you're grown, you might need this money for something important, for your own family, or to help someone who needs it more than we do, so you're going to keep it safe until then." "But I want to help now," Ethan protested, tears welling in his eyes. "You are helping. Every day, just by being here, by talking to us, by being brave enough to come back from that quiet place you went to after Mama died. That's the help we need most." Lucas pressed the bag back into Ethan's hands. "Keep your money. Keep being brave. That's enough." Ethan clutched the bag to his chest, nodding even as tears spilled down his cheeks. Evelyn gathered him close, and Lucas wrapped his arms around both of them, the three of them holding each other in the gray dawn light, while the impossible problem loomed around them like walls closing in. After breakfast, which none of them had much appetite for, Lucas rode into town despite the threatening weather, determined to speak with anyone who might help. Evelyn watched him go from the window, Ethan pressed against her side, both of them silent and worried. "Is Papa going to fix it?" Ethan asked finally. "He's going to try." Evelyn smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "We both are." "What can I do?" The question caught her off guard. What could a 4-year-old do in the face of adult problems, adult debts, adult consequences? But looking down at his earnest face, his eyes so serious and determined, she realized he needed a purpose as much as she did. Needed to feel like he was helping instead of just waiting for disaster. "You can help me think," she said slowly. "Your mama, she was smart, wasn't she? Good at solving problems?" Ethan nodded vigorously. "Mama could fix anything. Papa always said so." Then maybe she left some ideas behind. Things she was working on, or thinking about, or planning for the future. Evelyn was grasping at straws, she knew, but sometimes straws were all you had. "Would you help me look through her things? Maybe we'll find something useful." Ethan hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face. Catherine's belongings had been packed away after her death, stored in the spare room where Lucas now slept. Opening those boxes meant confronting grief that was still raw, still capable of drawing blood. "She wouldn't mind," Evelyn said gently. "She'd want us to use anything that could help." "Okay," Ethan whispered. "Okay. We can look." They climbed the stairs together and entered the spare room where Lucas had been sleeping since giving up the master bedroom. His things were few and neat. A change of clothes, his shaving kit, little else. But stacked against the far wall were 3 wooden crates, their contents carefully covered with clean cloth. Evelyn lifted the cloth from the first crate and found Catherine's dresses, folded with care, smelling faintly of lavender and loss. The second crate held books, poetry, novels, a Bible with notes in the margins. The third contained papers, correspondence, a journal bound in worn leather. "May I read this?" Evelyn asked Ethan, holding up the journal. He nodded, settling beside her on the floor as she opened to the first page. Catherine's handwriting was neat and flowing, the words of a woman who'd loved language and used it precisely. The early entries were mundane: weather observations, recipes, notes about the garden she'd planted and the chickens she'd raised. But as Evelyn read deeper, a pattern emerged. Catherine had been interested in beekeeping, had researched it extensively, had even corresponded with an apiarist 3 counties over about acquiring hives. She'd calculated potential honey production, estimated market prices, projected income that could supplement the ranch's earnings. She wanted bees, Ethan said, looking at the drawings Catherine had made in the margins, careful sketches of hives and frames and the flowers that attracted pollinators. She said they'd make the garden better and give us honey to sell. "Why didn't your father set it up?" Evelyn asked, already knowing the answer. "She got sick before she could start, and after—" Ethan trailed off. After she died, nothing else had seemed to matter. Evelyn read through the rest of the journal, absorbing Catherine's careful plans, her calculations, her research. It was thorough and well-reasoned, the work of someone who'd seen a problem and developed a practical solution. But bees required investment, purchasing hives, acquiring the initial colonies, buying equipment. Money they didn't have. She was about to close the journal in disappointment when a loose paper fell from the back pages, a letter, addressed to Catherine but never sent, dated just weeks before her death. Evelyn read it once, then again, her heart beginning to pound. "Ethan," she said carefully, "did your mother have a sister?" "Aunt Margaret. She lives in Omaha." Ethan's face brightened. "She's nice. She brought me peppermints when she visited." The letter was from Margaret, responding to one Catherine had apparently sent asking for a loan to start the bee operation. Margaret had agreed, offered to send the money as soon as Catherine gave the word. But Catherine had died before she could respond, and the offer had remained unclaimed. Evelyn clutched the letter, her mind racing. Omaha, Margaret, a woman who'd been willing to help her sister might be willing to help her sister's family. It was a chance, anyway. A thread to pull when they had nothing else. When Lucas returned that afternoon, his face told the story before he spoke. Every door had been closed, every possibility exhausted. The people who might have helped were either too afraid of Garrett or too broke themselves to risk it. "I'm sorry," he said heavily, sinking into a chair at the kitchen table. "I tried everyone I could think of." "I found something," Evelyn said. She explained about the journal, about Catherine's plans, about Margaret's letter. "If we could reach her, if she'd honor the offer she made to Catherine—" "That was for bees, not paying off debt," Lucas interrupted. "And it was offered to my wife, not to us." "Your wife who was her sister, who wanted to save this ranch just like we do." Evelyn set the letter in front of him. "We could write to her, explain the situation, ask if she'd be willing to help." Lucas read the letter slowly, his expression unreadable. "Even if she agreed, we'd never get the money in time. Mail to Omaha and back takes at least 10 days, and that's if everything goes perfectly." "Then I'll go to Omaha myself," Evelyn said. The words came out before she'd fully thought them through, but once spoken, they felt right, inevitable. "I'll leave tomorrow, ride hard, get there in 2 days. Talk to Margaret in person, convince her to help." "That's insane. You don't know the route, don't know the dangers." "I walked 40 miles through a winter storm with nothing but desperation keeping me upright," Evelyn cut him off. "I think I can manage a 2-day ride to Omaha." "Alone? A woman traveling alone? Would you rather lose the ranch?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended, but she didn't soften it. "Because that's our choice. I go and maybe fail, or we stay here and definitely lose everything." Lucas stared at her, something like awe flickering across his face. "You've been here barely a month, and you're willing to risk yourself for a place that isn't even really yours." "It is mine," Evelyn said firmly. "I'm your wife. My name is on that deed. This is my home, my family, my fight as much as yours." She paused, then added more softly, "Unless you don't want it to be." "Want it to be?" Lucas stood abruptly, crossing to stand before her. "Evelyn, I married you because I was desperate, and you were convenient, and I needed someone to keep my house from falling apart.
But what you've become, what you are to us now, that's not convenience. That's not desperation. He took her hands, his grip warm and steady. If you want to go to Omaha, I won't stop you. But I'm going with you. You can't. Ethan needs someone here, and if we both go, I'll stay. The voice came from the doorway where Ethan stood, his wooden horse tucked under his arm, his expression determined. I'll be brave and stay here and take care of the animals. Son, you're 4 years old, Lucas started, but Ethan shook his head fiercely. I'm almost 5, and I know how to feed the chickens and give the cow hay and keep the fires going. Mrs. Henderson, next ranch over, she'd check on me if you asked her to. He straightened his shoulders. I can do it. I'm not scared. Evelyn looked at this child who'd been silent with grief just weeks ago, now standing tall and offering to be alone so his parents could fight for their home. The transformation was staggering, heartbreaking, magnificent. We'll ask Mrs. Henderson to stay here with you, Lucas said finally. She's a widow, could use the break from her own place, and she's known you since you were born. Would that be acceptable? Ethan nodded, satisfied with the compromise. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Lucas rode to the Henderson ranch and returned with Mrs. Henderson herself, a sturdy woman in her 60s with kind eyes and capable hands who asked no questions beyond what needed doing and when they'd be back. You take care of your business, she told them, already rolling up her sleeves and surveying the kitchen with the assessing eye of someone used to making do. The boy and I will manage just fine. That night, Evelyn packed what little she'd need, a change of clothes, some food, the letter from Margaret. Lucas checked and rechecked the horses, the saddles, the route they'd take. Neither of them spoke much about what would happen if they failed, if Margaret refused, if they couldn't get back in time. There was no point dwelling on certainties they couldn't change. Evelyn was braiding her hair for the journey when a soft knock sounded at her door. She opened it to find Lucas standing in the hallway, his expression uncertain in the lamplight. Can I come in? He asked. She stepped back, allowing him entry. He stood awkwardly in the middle of her room, the master bedroom that had been his until he'd given it to her, that still bore traces of the life he'd shared with Catherine. I wanted to thank you, he said finally, for what you're doing, for what you've already done. He paused, searching for words. When I asked you to marry me, I never expected, I didn't think. Neither did I, Evelyn admitted. I was just trying to survive. Find a place to sleep, food to eat, a reason to keep walking. And now? Now I'm fighting for a home, for a family. She met his eyes directly. For you and Ethan. For this life we're building together. Lucas crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, framing her face with his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses. If we lose the ranch, if this all falls apart, you and Ethan, you're still my family. That doesn't change. We're not going to lose, Evelyn said, leaning into his touch despite herself. I won't let us. He kissed her then, sudden and fierce and desperate, and Evelyn kissed him back with equal intensity, all the fear and hope and impossible affection she'd been trying not to feel pouring out in that single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. We should sleep, he said, making no move to leave. Long ride tomorrow. We should, Evelyn agreed, equally still. They stood together in the lamplight, the precipice of something more looming before them, both understanding that crossing it now would only complicate what was already impossibly tangled. Finally, Lucas stepped back, his hands falling away from her face. Thank you, he said again, for choosing us, for staying. Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him, and Evelyn was alone with her racing heart and the ghost of his kiss still burning on her lips. They left before dawn, Ethan and Mrs. Henderson seeing them off with quiet waves and brave faces. The ride to Omaha was hard and cold, but the weather held and the horses were strong. They stopped only when necessary, pushing through exhaustion and discomfort with single-minded determination. Lucas proved to be good company despite the circumstances, pointing out landmarks, sharing stories about the territory, filling the long hours with conversation that kept fatigue at bay. Evelyn found herself learning things about him she'd never thought to ask, that he'd been born in Ohio and come west with his parents as a teenager, that he'd learned ranching from his father, who died the year before Ethan was born, that Catherine had been a school teacher before they married and had taught Ethan his letters before illness claimed her. She would have liked you, Lucas said as they made camp the first night, building a small fire against the cold. Catherine, I mean. She always said I needed someone who'd push back, who wouldn't let me wallow when things got hard. Is that what I do? Evelyn asked, amused despite her exhaustion. Push back? Constantly. It's infuriating. Lucas smiled, taking the sting from the words. And exactly what we needed. They reached Omaha late the second day, tired and filthy and running on pure determination. Margaret's address from the letter led them to a neat house on a respectable street, lamplight glowing warmly in the windows. Evelyn's heart hammered as Lucas knocked on the door. A woman answered, younger than Evelyn expected, perhaps 30, with Catherine's eyes and a cautious smile. Can I help you? Margaret? Lucas asked. Margaret Thompson? Yes? The smile faded to confusion. I'm sorry, do I know you? I'm Lucas Blackwood, Catherine's husband. He paused, the present tense still difficult. Was Catherine's husband. This is my wife, Evelyn. Understanding and grief crashed across Margaret's face in equal measure. Lucas, oh my heavens, come in, come in. She ushered them inside, calling for her husband, for tea, her hands fluttering with the need to help, to serve, to fill the awkward space with action. I'm so sorry I couldn't make it to the funeral. We were traveling, and by the time we got your letter— It's all right, Lucas said, though his voice suggested it wasn't, not really. We're not here about that. We're here because we need help. They sat in Margaret's parlor and explained everything, the debt, the deadline, the letter offering money for bees that had never been claimed. Margaret listened with growing distress. Her husband, a quiet man named William, sitting beside her with his hand over hers. Of course we'll help, Margaret said when they'd finished. Catherine was my sister. If she were here, if she could ask me herself— Her voice broke. Of course we'll help. The relief was so intense that Evelyn felt dizzy with it. We'll pay you back, she promised. However long it takes, we'll pay every penny. We'll work out terms that are fair, William interrupted gently. But right now, you look like you're about to fall over. Margaret, make up the spare room. They can stay the night and we'll handle the financial arrangements in the morning. They stayed the night, and in the morning William went to his bank and withdrew enough to cover not just the debt to Garrett, but a small surplus besides. For the bees, he said, pressing the money into Lucas's hands, Catherine's dream shouldn't die with her. The ride back was faster, lighter, powered by hope instead of desperation. They reached the ranch with 2 days to spare, finding Ethan and Mrs. Henderson managing beautifully, the house warm and the animals fed and everything exactly as they'd left it. Ethan launched himself into their arms with a whoop of joy, chattering about everything that had happened while they were gone, secure in the knowledge that his parents had returned just as they'd promised. The next morning, Lucas rode alone to Garrett's property and paid the debt in full. He returned with the canceled note and the deed free and clear, setting both on the kitchen table where Evelyn was kneading bread. It's done, he said simply. Evelyn wiped flour from her hands and picked up the deed, seeing their names written together, Lucas and Evelyn Blackwood, legal owners of the ranch that had nearly been taken from them. She thought about how far she'd come from that frozen prairie, from knocking desperately on a stranger's door, from accepting a loveless marriage for the sake of survival. This wasn't loveless anymore, wasn't survival, was something richer and deeper and more real than anything she'd imagined possible. We did it, she said, looking up at Lucas. Together. He crossed to her and pulled her into his arms, and this time when he kissed her, it wasn't desperate or fierce, but tender and grateful and full of promise. When they broke apart, Evelyn could see Ethan watching from the doorway, grinning widely. Does this mean we get to keep the house? He asked. We get to keep the house, Lucas confirmed, and everything in it, including each other. Ethan whooped again and ran to join their embrace, the three of them holding each other in the kitchen that smelled of rising bread and coffee and home. Outside, winter was beginning to loosen its grip, the first hints of spring stirring in the frozen ground. Inside, a family that had been built from necessity and desperation was transforming into something chosen, something wanted, something that would last. Spring arrived with unexpected swiftness, as though the land itself had been holding its breath through winter and could finally exhale. The frozen prairie softened into mud, then greened almost overnight with new grass that rippled like water under the constant wind. Evelyn stood at the kitchen window, watching Lucas and Ethan work together in the yard, preparing the ground where Catherine's beehives would soon stand, and felt something close to contentment settle in her chest. The money from Margaret and William had saved them, but it was the work that came after, the daily choice to build rather than merely survive, that transformed the ranch from a place of grief into something alive with possibility. Lucas had thrown himself into preparations for the bees with an intensity that surprised Evelyn, reading through Catherine's journals late into the night, ordering supplies from the catalog she'd marked, treating the project like a sacred trust he'd been given. "It's what she wanted," he'd explained one evening, his fingers tracing Catherine's careful handwriting. "She saw the future clearly, saw what this place could become. Feels wrong not to honor that." Evelyn had wanted to feel jealous of the reverence in his voice when he spoke of his first wife, but found she couldn't. Catherine had been real, had been loved, had left behind more than grief. She'd left blueprints for survival, and it seemed right to build from them. The hives arrived on a bright April morning, delivered by a grizzled beekeeper named Hutchins, who'd agreed to stay a week and teach them the basics. He was a man of few words but infinite patience, showing Lucas and Evelyn how to handle the frames, how to read the bees' behavior, how to harvest honey without destroying what the bees had built. Ethan watched everything with wide-eyed fascination, asking questions faster than Hutchins could answer them, his fear of the insects overcome by curiosity and his father's calm competence. On the third day, Lucas let him hold a frame crawling with bees, his small hands steady under his father's larger ones. "They're tickling," Ethan giggled, his face split with a grin. Mama would have loved this. The casual mention of Catherine no longer carried the weight it once had. Grief was still present, but it had softened into something gentler, memory rather than wound, love rather than loss. Evelyn had learned to make space for Catherine in their conversations, understanding that honoring the past didn't diminish the present. "She would have," Lucas agreed, his hand resting on Ethan's shoulder. "She'd be proud of how brave you're being." That evening, after Hutchins had retired to the barn where they'd made him a comfortable bed, Lucas found Evelyn on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. He settled beside her on the step, close enough that their shoulders touched, and they sat in comfortable silence while the sky performed its nightly transformation. "I've been thinking," Lucas said finally, "about the sleeping arrangements." Evelyn's heart stuttered. Since returning from Omaha, since the kiss in her bedroom and again in the kitchen, they'd fallen back into their careful separation, Lucas in the spare room, Evelyn in the master bedroom, Ethan between them like a small buffer against complications neither was quite ready to face. "What about them?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. "They don't make sense anymore. Us in separate rooms, pretending this is still a marriage of convenience when we both know it stopped being that weeks ago." Lucas turned to look at her, his expression open in a way it rarely was. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, but I'm asking if maybe it's time to stop pretending we're strangers sharing a house instead of a husband and wife building a life together." Evelyn had known this conversation was coming, had felt it building in the way Lucas's hand would linger on hers when passing the coffee pot, in the way he'd started calling her my wife instead of just Evelyn, in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. What surprised her was how much she wanted to say yes, how ready she was to take that final step from partnership into something deeper. "I'm ready," she said quietly. "I've been ready. I was just waiting for you to ask." Lucas's smile was slow and warm, transforming his usually stern features into something tender. "Then I'm asking. Move back into our room, our bed. Let's stop living like we're afraid of what we've become." "And what have we become?" Evelyn asked, though she thought she knew. "A family. A real one. Not built on desperation, but on choice." Lucas took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I love you, Evelyn. Didn't plan to, didn't expect it, but I do. You and Ethan. You're my whole world now." The words she'd been holding back for weeks spilled out before she could stop them. "I love you too, both of you. This whole impossible, beautiful life we've built from nothing." Lucas kissed her then,
soft and sweet and full of promise. And when they broke apart, Evelyn saw Ethan watching from the window with a grin that suggested he'd been eavesdropping shamelessly and approved wholeheartedly of what he'd overheard. That night, Evelyn moved her few belongings back into the master bedroom, and Lucas joined her there with an awkwardness that was endearing in its earnestness.
They lay together in the darkness, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, both marveling at how natural it felt despite the strangeness. "Thank you," Lucas whispered into her hair, "for knocking on my door, for staying, for choosing us." "Thank you for opening it," Evelyn whispered back, "for giving me a reason to stay." They fell asleep tangled together, and when Evelyn woke in the deep hours of the night to Ethan's familiar crying, Lucas stirred with her. "I'll go," he offered, but Evelyn shook her head. "We'll both go." They found Ethan sitting up in bed, tears streaming down his face, the wooden horse clutched to his chest. Without discussion, they climbed into bed on either side of him, creating a cocoon of warmth and presence that gradually calmed his hitching breaths. "Bad dream?" Evelyn asked softly. Ethan nodded against her shoulder. "Want to talk about it?" "Everyone left," he whispered. "You and Papa and Mama and everyone. I was all alone." "Oh, sweetheart." Evelyn held him closer. "That's not going to happen. We're right here, and we're staying." "Promise?" The question was directed at both of them, his eyes moving between his parents in the darkness. "Promise," Lucas said firmly. "You're stuck with us, son. For better or worse, in sickness and health, for as long as we all shall live." Something about the formal words, the marriage vows spoken to a child instead of a spouse, seemed to satisfy Ethan in a way simple reassurance couldn't. He relaxed between them, his tears drying, his breathing evening out. "Can I sleep here tonight?" he asked. "With both of you?" "Of course," Evelyn said, and Lucas nodded agreement. They settled into an awkward arrangement, Ethan in the middle, Lucas on one side, Evelyn on the other. That was uncomfortable and perfect in equal measure. This was family, Evelyn thought, as sleep reclaimed her. Not the neat, organized version she'd imagined as a girl, but something messier and more real and infinitely more precious. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both new and timeless. Lucas worked the ranch with renewed energy, repairing fences and buildings that had been neglected during his months of grief. Evelyn managed the house and the bees, learning from Hutchins and then from her own experiments, her confidence growing with each small success. Ethan thrived under the attention of two parents instead of one, his vocabulary expanding daily, his laughter becoming as common as his tears had once been. In late May, a letter arrived from Margaret containing not just a warm note asking after their welfare, but also a small package for Ethan. Inside was a collection of wooden animals to add to his growing menagerie, including a detailed bee that must have been commissioned specially. "Look, Mama!" Ethan exclaimed, holding up the carved bee with its delicate wings and careful stripes. "It's like our real bees." The casual use of Mama no longer made Evelyn's breath catch. It had become so natural, so constant, that she couldn't remember a time when Ethan had called her anything else. She'd worried in the early days that accepting the title meant erasing Catherine, but Lucas had assured her otherwise. "You're not replacing her," he'd said. "You're becoming who Ethan needs now. Catherine would be grateful, not hurt." Evelyn wrote back to Margaret that evening, thanking her for the gift and updating her on the ranch's progress. She included a drawing Ethan had made of their family, stick figures labeled Papa, Mama, and me, standing beside blocky representations of the house and barn and beehives. It was crude but full of joy, and Evelyn thought Catherine's sister would appreciate seeing how her niece's son was flourishing. June brought the first honey harvest, and Hutchins returned to oversee the process and ensure they didn't destroy what they'd built. Lucas and Evelyn worked side by side, their movements synchronized from months of partnership, extracting frames heavy with golden honey, while Ethan watched from a safe distance and asked 1,000 questions. "Will it taste good?" he wanted to know. "Better than good," Hutchins promised. "Prairie wildflower honey is some of the finest there is. You'll be able to sell every drop you can produce." He was right. When they took the first batch to town the following week, it sold out within hours, merchants and families alike eager for the sweet luxury. Lucas negotiated prices that made Evelyn's head spin, his natural reserve translating into shrewd business sense when he chose to employ it. "Catherine's investment is already paying off," he said on the ride home, the empty jars rattling in the wagon bed behind them. "Another few harvests like this and we'll have enough to pay Margaret and William back ahead of schedule." But Evelyn's attention had been caught by something else she'd seen in town. A notice posted at the general store seeking a teacher for the small school that served the scattered ranch families. The position paid little but offered a house and the respect that came with education. "I saw the teaching notice," she said carefully. "Were you planning to mention it?" Lucas's hands tightened on the reins. "Thought about it. Wasn't sure if you'd be interested." "Why wouldn't I be?" "Because you've got plenty to do at the ranch. The bees, the house." "Ethan," he paused. "Because I didn't want you to feel obligated to take on more just because we need the money. We're managing." Evelyn studied his profile, reading the tension in his shoulders. "You think I'd want to teach?" "I think you're smart enough to do it well." Catherine loved teaching, talked about it all the time. "Thought maybe you might too." Lucas finally looked at her. "But only if you want to, not because of what Catherine did or what we need. Only if it's something you choose for yourself." The question settled something that had been nagging at Evelyn for weeks. The sense that she was living in Catherine's shadow, following paths already laid instead of creating her own. Lucas was offering her a choice, a chance to be something more than a replacement or a convenience. "I'll think about it," she said. "Really think about it, not just agree because it seems like what I should do." She thought about it through the rest of June and into July, weighing her interest against the practical realities of managing both teaching and the ranch work. In the end, it was Ethan who helped her decide. "Would you teach me?" he asked one evening when she was reading to him from one of Catherine's books. "Reading and writing and numbers and everything?" "Of course. We can start whenever you're ready." "What about the other children?" Ethan's face was serious. "The ones who don't have mamas who can teach them? Who teaches them?" Evelyn's heart swelled with love for this child who thought beyond himself, who worried about children he didn't know. "That's what school teachers are for." "You could be a school teacher," Ethan said with the simple logic of childhood. "Then you could teach everyone." So she applied and was accepted, and by August she was standing in the small schoolhouse teaching 15 children ranging from 5 to 14, their faces eager and wary and desperate for the knowledge she offered. It was exhausting and exhilarating and filled a space in her she hadn't known was empty. Lucas managed the ranch and the bees with Ethan's help, the two of them developing a partnership that reminded Evelyn of what Lucas had described of his relationship with his own father. They worked hard and laughed often and waited for Evelyn to come home each afternoon with stories of her students and the small victories of education. Summer faded into autumn, and with it came the letter they'd been half expecting, half dreading. Margaret wrote that she and William were planning to visit, to see how their investment was being used, and to meet Evelyn properly, and to spend time with their nephew, who'd been just a grieving child the last time they'd seen him. They arrived on a crisp October afternoon, their carriage well appointed, their luggage speaking of people accustomed to comfort. Evelyn felt suddenly conscious of the ranch's rough edges, the house's simple furnishings, her own work-worn hands and plain dress. But Margaret swept her into a warm embrace before she could voice her anxieties. "You look wonderful," Margaret said, holding Evelyn at arm's length to study her face. "Happy. Catherine would be so glad." The visit that Evelyn had worried might be awkward or painful turned out to be healing instead. Margaret and William admired the bees, praised the honey, listened to Evelyn's teaching stories, and Ethan's endless chatter with genuine interest. On the second evening, after Ethan had been tucked into bed, Margaret asked to see Catherine's grave. They walked together in the twilight, Lucas, Evelyn, Margaret, and William, to the small plot on the hill behind the house where Catherine rested beneath a simple wooden marker Lucas had carved himself. Margaret knelt and placed wildflowers on the grave, her tears falling silently. "I'm sorry I wasn't here," she whispered. "When she needed me most, I was traveling, living my life, not knowing she was dying." "She wouldn't want you to carry that," Lucas said quietly. "She'd want you to be happy, to live fully, to help us raise her son with joy instead of guilt." "Are you happy?"
Margaret looked up at them, her gaze moving between Lucas and Evelyn. Truly? Yes, Lucas said without hesitation, reaching for Evelyn's hand. We've built something good here. Something Catherine started and we're continuing. Different than what she and I had, but no less real. Margaret stood and embraced them both, and Evelyn understood this was Catherine's sister's blessing on their marriage, her permission to move forward without forgetting the past. When they walked back to the house together, something had been laid to rest that went deeper than Catherine's body in the ground. The morning Margaret and William were set to leave, they sat at the kitchen table while Evelyn served coffee and the cinnamon rolls she'd learned to make from Catherine's recipe book. "We've been talking," William said, his businessman's tone softening with emotion, "about the loan. We'd like to forgive the interest entirely and extend the repayment timeline. You're family, and family helps family without expecting profit." "That's too generous," Lucas protested, but William held up a hand. "It's fair. You're raising Catherine's son, honoring her dreams, building something that would make her proud. That's worth more to us than money." He paused. "Besides, Margaret tells me you're expecting?" The question caught both Lucas and Evelyn off guard. They looked at each other, Evelyn's hand moving unconsciously to her stomach, where she'd begun to suspect, but hadn't been certain, that new life was growing. How did you know?" Evelyn asked. Margaret smiled. "I've had 3 children of my own. I recognize the signs, and the way you've been avoiding coffee the past few days confirmed it." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. She hadn't told Lucas yet, hadn't been sure herself until Margaret's knowing look made denial impossible. "I think so. Yes, maybe 3 months?" Lucas's face transformed, shock giving way to wonder, giving way to pure joy. He pulled Evelyn into his arms, his voice rough when he spoke. "A baby. We're having a baby." "Ethan's going to have a brother or sister," Evelyn said, laughing and crying at once. "He'll be so excited." "Catherine would be thrilled," Margaret said softly. "She always wanted Ethan to have siblings, to know she's going to be a part of this in some way, that our family is growing, continuing." She stopped, overcome. They told Ethan that afternoon, after Margaret and William had departed with promises to return in spring. He processed the information with the seriousness he brought to all important matters, his face thoughtful. "Will the baby be a boy or a girl?" he asked. "We won't know until the baby comes," Lucas explained. "Will it look like Mama? My first Mama, or Mama Evelyn?" The question was asked with such innocence, such acceptance of his dual heritage, that Evelyn's heart clenched. "Probably a little of both," she said. "And a lot like you, since you'll be the big brother." Ethan's face brightened. "I'll teach it things, like Papa teaches me. How to take care of bees and feed chickens and not be scared of the dark." "Those are very good things to teach," Lucas agreed solemnly. Winter came again, but this time there was no desperate woman freezing on the porch, no silent child locked in grief, no man drowning in loss and debt. There was instead a family, imperfect and improvised but deeply rooted, preparing for the spring and the new life it would bring. Evelyn's body changed, swelling with the child she carried, and she marveled at the strangeness of it. Lucas treated her like she was made of glass, fussing over her in ways that were equal parts annoying and endearing. Ethan took his role as future big brother seriously, helping with chores without being asked, being gentle in ways he hadn't been before. On a February evening, when the wind howled outside and snow piled against the windows, Evelyn went into labor. Lucas rode through the storm to fetch the midwife, while Ethan stayed close, his small hand gripping hers, offering the same comfort she'd once given him in his grief. "You'll be okay, Mama," he whispered. "You're brave. You're the bravest person I know." The labor was long and difficult, testing Evelyn's strength in ways the winter prairie never had. But when dawn broke clear and cold, a baby's cry filled the house, strong and insistent and alive. "A girl!" the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant in Evelyn's arms. Healthy and fierce and ready to take on the world. Lucas knelt beside the bed, his face wet with tears, his finger tracing their daughter's tiny features with wondering gentleness. "She's perfect," he breathed. "Absolutely perfect." "Can I see?" Ethan asked from the doorway, and they made room for him on the bed,
this growing family arranging themselves around their newest member. "What should we name her?" Lucas asked. Evelyn had been thinking about this for months, wrestling with the weight of naming, of choosing something that honored the past without being trapped by it. "Catherine," she said softly, "for your first wife, who gave us Ethan and the dreams that saved us. Catherine Evelyn Blackwood." Lucas's expression crumpled, and he buried his face in Evelyn's shoulder, his body shaking with sobs he'd been holding back for over a year. She held him while he cried, one hand on their new daughter, one hand on her husband, Ethan pressed against her other side, the four of them bound together by love and loss and the choice to keep living despite everything. "Catherine would be honored," Lucas said finally, his voice thick. "Thank you for knowing what she meant, for making space for her memory in our future." "She's part of our story," Evelyn said simply. "She always will be." Spring returned with new grass and new flowers, and the familiar work of bees and teaching and ranch life. But now there was also the work of a baby, feeding and changing, and the sleepless nights that came with new motherhood. Evelyn moved through the exhaustion in a haze of wonder, marveling that she'd created this life, that she was part of this family, that the frozen woman who'd knocked on Lucas's door a little over a year ago had become someone capable of such fierce love. On a warm May evening, the whole family sat on the porch watching the sunset. Lucas in the rocking chair with baby Catherine sleeping against his shoulder, Evelyn beside him with Ethan on her lap, all of them tired and content and thoroughly alive. The bees hummed in their hives, the chickens settled into their roosts, the prairie stretched endless and green in every direction. "Tell me the story again," Ethan requested as he did most evenings, "about how you and Mama found each other." Lucas and Evelyn exchanged glances, the story they'd told so many times now polished smooth with repetition. "It was the coldest winter anyone could remember," Evelyn began, her voice taking on the cadence of fairy tale. "And I was lost on the frozen prairie with nowhere to go and no one to help me. And Papa was all alone with his little boy who'd stopped talking," Ethan continued, knowing his part. "That's right," Lucas picked up the thread. "I was so sad and so tired and so sure that nothing would ever be good again, and then one day there was a knock on the door. And Mama was there," Ethan said with satisfaction. "And Mama was there," Evelyn confirmed, "freezing and starving and desperate. And your papa, he could have turned me away. Lots of people did. But he didn't. Because we needed each other," Lucas said, his eyes meeting Evelyn's over their children's heads, "even though we didn't know it yet." "And then you got married," Ethan prompted. "We did. Not because we loved each other, but because we were both so lonely and scared and trying to survive." "But then what happened?" This was Ethan's favorite part. "Then we started living instead of just surviving," Evelyn said softly. "We chose each other every day. And eventually, survival turned into family, and family turned into love, and love turned into this." She gestured at all of them, the sleeping baby, the chattering boy, the man who'd offered marriage as a business transaction and had become her whole heart. "And we lived happily ever after?" Ethan asked, even though he knew the answer. "We lived," Lucas corrected gently. "Happily some days, hard some days, but always together. That's better than any fairy tale." They sat in the gathering dusk, three people who'd been broken and one who was brand new, all of them choosing each other, all of them understanding that love wasn't something that happened to you, but something you built with patience and purpose, and the determination to keep showing up even when it was hard. Evelyn thought about the woman she'd been, desperate, terrified, willing to agree to anything for the chance to survive one more day. She thought about the man Lucas had been, drowning in grief, certain joy would never return, making impossible offers because he'd run out of reasonable options. She thought about Ethan locked in silence, and the ranch crumbling under neglect, and all the ways they could have failed each other. But they hadn't failed. They'd fought and forgiven and built something real from the ruins of their separate losses. Three broken pieces that had somehow fit together into something whole and strong and infinitely precious. The baby stirred against Lucas's shoulder, making the small sounds that meant she'd wake soon and demand feeding. Ethan yawned hugely, already half asleep in Evelyn's lap. The sun completed its descent below the horizon, leaving them in the soft twilight that was neither day nor night, but something in between. Time for bed, Lucas said, standing carefully to avoid waking Catherine. They moved inside together, settling children into beds, banking fires, completing the nightly rituals that marked the end of one day and the promise of another. When they finally climbed into their own bed, exhausted but content, Lucas pulled Evelyn close. "I love you," he said, as he did every night. "I choose you, today and every day." "I love you too," Evelyn replied, as she always did. "I choose you, I choose us. I choose this life we've built." Outside, the prairie wind sang through the grass and the bees rested in their hives, and the house stood solid against the darkness, sheltering the family inside. A family not born but made, not perfect but real, not rescued but choosing daily to rescue each other. 3 broken lives had knocked together in desperation and discovered something neither rescue nor convenience could provide. The profound grace of being chosen, the fierce joy of choosing in return, and the knowledge that home was never a place but always the people who refused to leave. They had found their home in each other. And that, Evelyn thought as sleep claimed her, was the only happily ever after that ever really mattered.